In the heart of the city, the late afternoon sun filtered through the glass facade of a bustling office tower. The lobby was alive with the noise of hurried footsteps, ringing phones, and the distant murmur of conversations. Mark Bennett, a man in his mid-30s with a worn leather messenger bag slung over his shoulder, stepped into the building. His eyes flicked briefly to his watch. He was cutting it close to the 5 p.m. rush, a time when the elevators were packed and patience was thin. Mark had just closed a modest deal at his small marketing firm and was eager to get home to his daughter, Lily. The thought of her waiting by the window, counting the minutes until he returned, gave him a quick smile. He stepped into the elevator as the doors slid open, joining a cluster of office workers already inside. As the doors began to close, a woman in a sharp navy suit brushed past him, slipping in just before the metal barriers sealed shut. The elevator lurched upward, and Mark's gaze drifted to the mirrored ceiling. The reflection showed the woman's face, a tight jaw, eyes darting nervously to the illuminated floor numbers. She looked out of place in the crowd, her posture tense, as if bracing for something unknown. Suddenly, the elevator shuddered violently, then jerked to an abrupt halt between floors. The lights flickered, then settled into a dim emergency glow. A collective breath escaped the cabin. The hum of the elevator motor died away, replaced by an eerie silence. Mark instinctively pressed the emergency button, but the speaker crackled faintly before going dead. The woman took a step back, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the stainless steel handrail. "Looks like we're stuck," Mark said, trying to keep his voice calm despite the sudden spike of adrenaline. His heart pounded against his ribs, but he forced himself to breathe steadily. He glanced at the woman. "Are you okay?" She nodded, but her eyes betrayed her anxiety. I'm not sure. I have a meeting I can't miss," she said, her voice tight. "This is so frustrating." Mark shifted his bag, feeling the familiar weight of his old first aid book inside, the one he kept from his days working construction. It was a habit he'd never quite shaken, carrying a reminder that sometimes knowledge could make all the difference. He swallowed the growing knot of unease in his stomach and turned his attention back to the elevator's control panel. The emergency light blinked steadily, unhelpful in its silence. Minutes ticked by, and the small space seemed to shrink. The muffled sounds of the city outside felt distant, as if they were trapped in a bubble. The woman's breathing grew sharper, and Mark reached out, offering a reassuring smile. "We'll get help. They'll know we're here." She looked up, her eyes locking with his, searching for truth. "I'm Sarah," she said, extending a hand. Mark took it. Her grip was firm but cold. "Mark," he replied. His mind raced through possibilities. Could the elevator cables have snapped? Was it a power outage? Or worse, a mechanical failure that would leave them stranded for hours? He recalled the safety protocols he'd learned years ago, the drills from his brief time on construction sites where emergencies were routine but never welcome. Sarah leaned against the wall, her fingers tightening around the strap of her leather handbag. "I'm not good with this kind of stuff," she admitted. "I get claustrophobic." Mark nodded empathetically. "I get it. It's tough being stuck in a small space. But the key is to stay calm. Panicking won't help us." He pulled out his phone, only to find the screen dark, no signal. Frustration crept in, but Mark forced himself to focus. He scanned the elevator for anything useful, a floor directory, an emergency manual, a phone. The emergency phone panel was dead. The digital interface was unresponsive. "Do you have any medical issues I should know about?" Mark asked gently, recalling the importance of assessing anyone in distress. Sarah shook her head. "No, just this meeting. It's important." Mark nodded. "Okay, we'll keep ourselves busy and keep calm. That's how we get through this." He settled against the wall, trying to make himself comfortable despite the cramped space. He noticed Sarah's hands fidgeting with a silver bracelet, a simple band, worn and scratched. It reminded him of the little moments that tethered people to their lives beyond the chaos. The elevator creaked softly, a reminder of its precarious position. Mark's thoughts drifted to Lily again, how she must be waiting, wondering why her dad was late. He pictured her sitting cross-legged on the floor by the window, the late afternoon light casting shadows on her face. The image steeled his resolve. "Do you want to talk?" he asked, trying to break the silence. "Sometimes it helps to take your mind off things." Sarah hesitated before nodding. "I'm a project manager. I work here in the building. Today was supposed to be a big presentation. If I miss it, it could cost me the contract. Mark listened as she spoke, her voice gradually steadying. He shared a little about his own life, mentioning his daughter and how his day job rarely involved anything exciting. But he stayed clear of his deeper worries, focusing instead on the present. As the minutes stretched into what felt like hours, Mark kept checking the elevator's interior lights and control buttons. He tapped the sides gently, hoping to signal someone outside, but the walls swallowed his efforts. "Do you think someone knows we're here?" Sarah asked, a flicker of hope in her voice. Mark nodded. "The building's security will notice when the elevator stops moving. They'll send help." The two settled into a rhythm, Mark offering reassurances, Sarah slowly regaining composure. Their shared predicament forged an unspoken bond between them. Strangers caught in a small metal box suspended between floors in a city that never seemed to stop moving. Suddenly, the elevator jolted slightly, a subtle movement that sent a ripple of energy through the cabin. Mark's heart leapt. Maybe the backup generator was kicking in, or a technician was working on the issue. "Hold on," he said, gripping the handrail. The elevator shuddered again, then settled. "We're not alone," Sarah whispered, a trace of a smile breaking through. Mark returned her smile. Not alone at all. Outside, somewhere beyond the thick metal doors, the city continued its relentless pace. But inside that small elevator, two strangers found a moment of calm, a fragile connection in the face of uncertainty. Mark's mind stayed clear, his instincts guiding him to be the steady presence Sarah needed. As the emergency lights glowed softly, Mark silently vowed to keep that calm, to be the anchor until help arrived. Because some moments, he knew, were about more than just being stuck. They were about standing strong when it mattered most. The elevator remained motionless, the dull hum of the city outside muffled by thick steel walls. Mark shifted his weight, the cramped space pressing in with an almost physical weight. As the minutes ticked by, he found himself reflecting on the life waiting for him beyond these doors, a life tethered tightly to a small apartment across town, to a little girl whose wide eyes and infectious laughter were his world. Mark was a single father, a role that had redefined every part of his existence since Lily's mother had passed away 3 years earlier. She had been taken by a sudden illness, a cruel twist that left Mark juggling the demands of work and parenthood with little time for himself. His days were a balancing act of school runs, homework sessions, and late-night lullabies, all threaded through the steady rhythm of his modest marketing job. The job didn't pay much, but it was steady, and it allowed him to provide for Lily in the way he felt mattered most, through presence, patience, and love. As the elevator's emergency light cast a soft glow over Sarah's face, Mark's mind wandered to his own past, to a time before responsibility had reshaped him. Before Lily, before the loss that had carved a permanent hollow in his heart. He wasn't always a man who found solace in quiet moments or small victories. Years ago, Mark had worked in construction, a world of hard hats, heavy machinery, and hands hardened by labor. It was in that environment that he had learned more than just the technical skills of the trade. Safety was paramount, and with it came training in first aid, basic but essential knowledge that had stuck with him long after he traded steel beams for spreadsheets. He remembered the foreman's voice, gruff but caring, drilling into the crew the importance of looking out for one another. "You never know when you'll be the difference between life and death," the man had said. Mark took those lessons seriously, even if his current life felt worlds away from those dusty construction sites. The first aid kit he carried, now tucked in his messenger bag, was a tangible reminder of that time, and of the practical skills that had become part of his character. But beyond the skills and the past, there was an internal struggle that Mark carried quietly. He often questioned whether he was enough. Enough as a father, enough as a provider, enough as a man facing the unpredictable challenges life threw his way. The elevator, trapped between floors, was a stark metaphor for his feelings. Caught in limbo, uncertain of what the next moment would bring. Mark glanced over at Sarah again. She was sitting on the floor now, knees drawn up, her posture tense but less frantic than before. There was a vulnerability in her he could relate to, a shared humanity beneath the professional exterior she wore like armor. He wondered what battles she fought beyond the glass walls of the office, what fears she kept hidden beneath her polished surface. The silence stretched, broken only by the occasional creak of the elevator's cables. Mark cleared his throat and spoke softly. You know, it's funny. I used to work in construction. Learned a bit about safety and first aid along the way. Sarah looked up, curiosity flickering in her eyes. Really? That's quite a shift from construction to marketing. Mark smiled faintly. Life has a way of changing direction. I left the construction sites when Lily was born. Wanted something steadier, more predictable. But those lessons stuck with me. You never stop needing to know how to help someone in trouble. He reached into his bag and pulled out the small first aid book. Its pages were dog-eared and worn, a testament to years of occasional review. I keep this with me just in case. Sarah took the book, flipping through it with a hint of fascination. You sound like you've had some pretty intense experiences. Mark shrugged. Nothing too dramatic. Just the usual scrapes and falls on the job. But it taught me to stay calm when things go sideways. That's what matters most, I think. Her gaze softened. I wish I had that kind of calm. Today's been so overwhelming. I'm scared this will ruin everything. Mark nodded, understanding more than she realized. I get that. I'm a dad. My biggest fear is not being there when Lily needs me. Every day is a balancing act. Work, parenting, grief. Sometimes it feels like you're drowning in it all. Sarah's eyes glistened with unshed tears. It's hard to admit that, especially at work. Everyone expects you to have it all together. Mark's voice lowered, sincere. No one has it all together. We just get better at pretending. He paused, then added, but moments like this, when everything's stripped down to just being human, it's okay to feel vulnerable. Sarah nodded slowly, the tension in her shoulders easing just a little. Thank you, Mark, for reminding me of that. Mark shifted again, trying to find a comfortable position without making the cramped space feel even smaller. You ever think about what you'd do if you had more time? More freedom? She smiled faintly, a wistful look crossing her face. I'd probably travel. See the world outside this city. Maybe take a break from the constant pressure. Mark chuckled softly. Sounds like a dream. Maybe one day, she said, her voice steadier. For a moment, the elevator was a sanctuary, a place where two strangers shared pieces of their lives, their fears, and their hopes. Outside, the building's security systems were undoubtedly alerting someone to the stalled elevator, but inside, time seemed suspended. Mark's thoughts returned to Lily. He pictured her sprawled on the living room floor, coloring books scattered around her, the soft glow of the television filling the room with warmth. He pictured the way she looked up when he walked through the door, the way her face lit up with pure joy. Those images grounded him, reminding him why he pushed through exhaustion and doubt every day. The elevator jolted again, a small but promising sign that help was near. Mark's shoulders relaxed slightly, but his protective instinct remained sharp. He looked at Sarah, offering a reassuring smile. We'll get out of here soon. Until then, we stick together. Sarah returned the smile, a flicker of hope shining in her eyes. Together. As the elevator hung suspended in the space between floors, Mark's mind stayed anchored to the lessons of his past, the importance of calm, of preparation, and of human connection. In this confined moment, those lessons were not just memories, but lifelines, guiding him through the uncertainty with quiet strength. The stale air inside the elevator seemed thicker now, each breath a reminder of the confined space they were trapped in. The minutes blurred together as Mark leaned against the cool metal wall, his eyes scanning the dim emergency panel for any sign of life beyond their prison. Outside, the distant sounds of the city continued unabated, but inside, the world had shrunk to this small, suspended box. Mark's mind raced through what little he knew about elevator safety protocols, recalling bits of training and past experiences. He pressed the emergency button again, listening to the faint crackle of static on the speaker, hoping for a clear connection. But the line remained dead. No voice, no reassurance from the outside world. Just silence. He glanced at Sarah, who sat on the floor clutching her knees, her face pale, but her eyes sharper now. The initial shock had given way to a simmering anxiety that flickered beneath her composed exterior. Mark could see the battle she was fighting, the rising panic held back by sheer will. "We need to do something," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I agree. The first thing is to make sure we're visible to anyone who might be looking." He moved to the elevator's control panel and began pressing buttons, hoping to trigger the floor indicators or emergency lights to catch attention. When that proved futile, he tried the small emergency hatch at the ceiling. It was locked, as expected, but he ran his fingers over the edges, testing for any give. Sometimes, maintenance crews check the shafts from above, Mark explained. If we can make noise or signal, they might hear us. Sarah looked up, her eyes wide. How do we do that? Mark took a deep breath, steadying himself. We can try tapping on the metal hatch. It's loud, and it might carry through the shaft. They began a slow rhythm of knocking, Mark's fists pounding against the hatch, Sarah joining in hesitantly. The sharp metallic echoes reverberated upward, bouncing off the shafts and walls. Mark counted the beats, trying to keep a steady pattern that would sound deliberate, a signal that someone might recognize. Minutes passed, the knocks fading into silence after each burst. There was no response, no distant footsteps or voices. Still, Mark refused to give up. Keep going, he urged. Somebody has to hear us. Sarah nodded, wiping a bead of sweat from her brow. I just want to get out of here. Mark's jaw tightened, the weight of responsibility settling heavier on his shoulders. He knew that panic could be contagious, and if Sarah lost control, it could spiral fast. He moved back to her side and crouched down. Listen, I'm going to teach you a little breathing technique, he said, voice calm but firm. It helps me when I'm stressed. He demonstrated slow, deep breaths, inhaling through the nose, holding for a moment, then exhaling slowly through pursed lips. Sarah mimicked him, her chest rising and falling with each measured breath. Mark stayed with her, counting quietly in his head, anchoring them both in the moment. As the minutes dragged on, Mark's thoughts flicked to the old first aid book in his bag. He pulled it out, flipping through the pages until he found the section on anxiety and panic attacks. He read aloud softly, sharing tips on grounding techniques and muscle relaxation. Sarah listened intently, grateful for the distraction and guidance. Then, an idea struck him. If the emergency phone isn't working, maybe this elevator has a manual override. He pointed to a small red lever near the control panel, partially hidden beneath a worn plastic cover. Some elevators have a manual release that maintenance crews can use. If we can move it, maybe it will reset the system or allow us to call for help. Sarah leaned in, watching as Mark carefully lifted the cover and grasped the lever. It was stiff, but with a firm pull, it shifted slightly. Nothing happened at first, but then the elevator lights flickered, and a faint mechanical were stirred in the walls. Mark's heart lifted. That's a good sign. Suddenly, the elevator shuddered and began to descend slowly, the floor indicators lighting up one by one. The movement was jerky, uneven, but unmistakable. Sarah gasped softly, the tension in her body easing. We're moving. Mark smiled, relief washing over him. See? Sometimes it just takes a little patience and persistence. As the elevator lowered toward the ground floor, Mark kept his voice steady, reassuring Sarah that they weren't alone and rescue was near. But the ride was far from smooth. The elevator groaned and jolted, each movement sending a ripple of anxiety through both of them. Mark gripped the handrail tightly, bracing himself. Hold on, he warned. It's going to be bumpy. Sarah clutched her handbag to her chest, eyes squeezed shut. Mark focused on the mechanics of the elevator, willing it to keep moving without faltering. After what felt like an eternity, the elevator came to a sudden, harsh stop. The lights flickered but remained on. Mark reached for the emergency button again, hoping the movement had restored the line. This time, a crackling voice came through. Elevator control, do you copy? We're aware of the stalled car between floors. Help is on the way. Stay calm. Relief flooded Mark's chest. He relayed the message to Sarah, who exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were tears of hope. Mark crouched beside her. See? Help is coming. We just have to keep calm and wait. Sarah nodded, her voice steady. Thank you, Mark, for everything. The two shared a quiet moment, the weight of their ordeal settling but the bond between them growing stronger. Mark's mind drifted briefly to Lily again, imagining the moment he'd walk through the door and hold her close. That thought fueled his resolve to be the steady presence for Sarah now, just as he was for his daughter every day. Outside the elevator, footsteps echoed in the shaft, and voices grew louder, a sign that the rescue team was near. Mark and Sarah exchanged a glance, a silent promise to face whatever came next together. The elevator doors remained closed for now, but the promise of freedom was tangible in the air. Mark stayed alert, ready to help Sarah through the final moments and whatever challenges awaited beyond the metal walls. In that suspended space between floors, Mark realized that courage was not the absence of fear but the choice to act despite it. His calm demeanor, the breathing techniques, the persistence in signaling, all had kept them grounded. And as the rescue team prepared to intervene, Mark knew that their ordeal was not just about survival. It was about holding on to hope when the world seemed to stand still. The elevator doors slid open with a grinding hiss, revealing a small team of building maintenance workers and security personnel. Mark pushed himself up from the floor, muscles stiff from the cramped ordeal, and helped Sarah to her feet. The fluorescent lights of the lobby felt almost harsh after the dim emergency glow inside the elevator, and the sudden rush of noise from the crowd gathering nearby was overwhelming. "Are you both okay?" asked a middle-aged man in a reflective vest, his face etched with concern. Mark nodded, still catching his breath. "We're fine, just a bit shaken." Sarah looked around, her professional composure slowly returning as she straightened her jacket and ran a hand through her hair. "Thank you," she said softly, directing her words toward Mark first, then the rescuers. "I don't know what I would have done without him." The workers exchanged glances, impressed by Mark's calm demeanor. One of them, a younger technician, approached Mark. "You kept your cool in there. That's not easy. Most people panic." Mark shrugged modestly. "I just try to stay calm and keep her calm. That was all." As the crowd dispersed, a security officer approached and introduced himself as Officer Daniels. "We're logging the incident, but I wanted to make sure you two are all right. We'll be following up with building management." Sarah nodded, her tone professional but with a trace of vulnerability beneath. "Yes, thank you. I'm Evelyn Hart, by the way. I work here, project manager." Mark extended his hand. "Mark Bennett. I'm in marketing at a small firm downtown." Evelyn's handshake was firm, her eyes meeting his with genuine gratitude. "Mark, you were a lifeline in there. I want to thank you properly." Over the next few days, the story of the elevator incident spread quietly through the building's offices. Evelyn, the poised and driven project manager, took a moment to reach out to Mark personally. They met in a quiet cafe near the building, away from the buzz of the city streets. Evelyn's posture was relaxed, a stark contrast to the tension Mark had seen during their confinement. She sipped her coffee before speaking. "I wanted to thank you again, Mark. What you did in that elevator, keeping me calm, guiding me through those moments, was remarkable." Mark shifted in his seat, feeling a flush of modesty. "I just did what I could. I remember being in tough spots before, and I guess those lessons stayed with me." Evelyn nodded thoughtfully. "I've spent so much time building this career, climbing the ladder, that I forgot how fragile life can be. Being stuck in that elevator made me realize how isolated I've been, even surrounded by people." Mark listened, sensing the layers beneath her words, the loneliness that sometimes accompanies success, the pressure to maintain an image at all costs. "I don't usually let people see that side of me," Evelyn continued, eyes downcast. "But you saw it, and you didn't judge." Mark met her gaze. "Everyone has their struggles. Sometimes it's the unexpected moments that remind us of what really matters." Their conversation drifted to the challenges of balancing demanding careers with personal lives, the sacrifices made, and the quiet hopes for something more meaningful. Evelyn confessed that despite her achievements, she often felt disconnected from the world outside her office walls. Mark shared snippets of his life as a single dad, the daily juggling act between work and raising Lily. He spoke of the exhaustion and the small victories, the bedtime stories, the school recitals, the simple joy of a shared meal. Evelyn smiled, a genuine warmth in her eyes. "You remind me of the importance of community, of not walking alone." As their meeting concluded, Evelyn surprised Mark with an invitation. "I'm starting a charitable initiative to support single parents. I think your experience and voice could make a real difference. Would you consider working with me on this?" Mark hesitated, uncertainty flickering across his face. The idea of stepping into the spotlight was daunting, but the thought of helping others like him resonated deeply. "I'd like that," he said finally. "It's time to turn those small moments into something bigger." They shook hands, a partnership forged not just from a shared crisis, but from a mutual desire to create change. As Mark left the cafe, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows on the pavement, he felt a shift within himself, a quiet acceptance of a new path unfolding. Back at home, Lily greeted him with a hug, her face bright with unspoken questions. Mark held her close, the weight of the day lifting slightly. He realized that heroism wasn't about grand gestures or accolades. It was in the courage to face fear, to offer kindness in unexpected places, and to build connections that could transform lives. And in that understanding, Mark found a renewed sense of purpose, one that would carry him forward, step by step, into whatever came next. Months later, the once quiet corners of Mark Bennett's life had transformed into a hub of activity and purpose. The modest marketing professional had stepped into a new role, one that blended his personal experiences with a growing mission to support others facing similar struggles. The partnership with Evelyn Hart had blossomed beyond the initial idea, culminating in the launch of a foundation dedicated to helping single-parent families navigate the complex challenges of daily life. The foundation, aptly named Stronger Together, offered resources ranging from emergency childcare to financial literacy workshops, all designed to empower parents trying to balance work and family. Mark had become a familiar face at community centers and local events, his genuine demeanor and stories resonating with those who attended. His efforts were not born from a desire for recognition, but from an authentic place of understanding and compassion. One crisp Saturday morning, Mark stood in the community hall, watching as a group of single parents engaged in a workshop led by volunteers from the foundation. The room was filled with the hum of conversation, laughter, and shared experiences, a stark contrast to the isolation many had once felt. Mark's eyes scanned the crowd until they settled on a young mother struggling to juggle her toddler and notes. He approached, offering a warm smile and a helping hand. "Hey there," he said softly. "Need some help?" She looked up, relief evident in her eyes. "Thank you. It's been a tough week." Mark nodded knowingly. "You're not alone. That's what we're here for." As the session continued, Mark's thoughts drifted to the journey that had brought him here, from the confined elevator where he'd met Evelyn Hart, to this vibrant space where hope was being rebuilt. The foundation was more than a project. It was a lifeline for many, including himself. Later that afternoon, Mark sat at his kitchen table, a cup of coffee warming his hands as Lily played nearby. She had grown noticeably over the months, her laughter filling their home with a lightness that Mark cherished. Watching her, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment, a quiet joy rooted in the knowledge that he was creating a better future not only for her, but for countless others. His phone buzzed with a message from Evelyn, updating him on a new grant awarded to the foundation. Mark smiled, grateful for the partnership that had sparked this transformation. As evening settled, Mark reflected on the lessons learned along the way. He thought about the fear and uncertainty trapped between elevator walls, the moments of vulnerability shared with a stranger, and the courage it took to step into the unknown. Those memories no longer carried the weight of anxiety, but had become the foundation of his strength. Mark glanced at the silver bracelet on his wrist, a simple band that had belonged to his wife. He no longer wore it as a symbol of loss, but as a reminder of resilience and the promise to keep moving forward. The world outside continued its relentless pace, but inside Mark's home, there was peace. He knew that heroism came in many forms, not just in grand gestures, but in the everyday acts of kindness, perseverance, and connection. As he tucked Lily into bed that night, her small hand gripping his, Mark whispered a quiet vow to be there. For her, for the families he now served, and for himself. Because sometimes, the greatest strength was found not in never falling but in rising, again and again, with hope as the guide.